Hello and welcome to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Carlotta Rebello. Over the next 60 minutes, we'll be bringing you some of the very best interviews and reports from the past week of coverage on Monocle Radio, with highlights from our studios here at Midori House and also from around the world. This week,
the more I've received feedback from readers and viewers and the like, that it's almost paternalistic, and they say, stop trying to protect me. And by the way, they say, you're not trying to protect me, you're really protecting the man.
The financial journalist Andrew Ross Sorkin gives us his predictions on the next financial bubble. Plus,
we need to understand from our partners what is the sparkle of Christmas or festive season for them.
Why Paris is enjoying a taste of a traditional Swiss Christmas. All that and much, much more over the next hour here on The Curator with me, Carlotta Rebello. We begin today's show with a look back at Monday's edition of The Globalist. Andrew Ross Sorkin is one of the world's leading financial journalists, CNBC host and founder of the Deal Book newsletter for The New York Times, and the author of Too Big to Fail, about the 2008 financial crisis. For his latest project, he's gone back further to 1929, the first major financial crisis. Andrew came to Midori House and spoke with Monocle's Chris Chermak, who began by asking what motivates Wall Street to keep pushing the boundaries.
We are always after the lottery ticket. I mean, I think that one of the things that happened actually in the 1920s that we live with today is a sort of shift in even what the American dream is or was. At one point, that dream was, this sort of rags to riches kind of, Horatio Alger dream. And I think in the 1920s, and I think that the dream you see on Instagram and TikTok today is a sort of get-rich-quick scheme. And I think everybody wants their chance at the ticket. The problem with getting the lottery ticket is that most people lose.
Or you get the lottery ticket and then you lose all the money once you've had the lottery.
Well, that's true too.
Is part of this also a failure almost to believe that another crisis can happen? Or is it something else, like more of a hubris in thinking that even if there is a crisis, I'm going to be the one who's able to ride that wave back to shore?
I will flip it around on myself and just say that here, I will counter my own argument about Moore or the lottery ticket, because there's one other piece to that, and it doesn't fit the narrative. Because the truth is that if you look over the last 100 years, it has been much more profitable to be a professional optimist than a professional skeptic or Cassandra. It just has. In fact, by the way, there's a sort of a fun moment in the book where Winston Churchill shows up in New York. He's actually there during the crash, which is shocking. But after the crash, and he lost some money, he got bitten by the bug too of stock trading. He talks about the idea of this sort of American optimism. And it's true that speculation, you do need some sense of speculation in the system to create any great innovation. Whoever was investing in Tesla at the beginning, when it seemed like a completely absurd idea, needed to be a speculator. And so you want some kind of speculation. So the question is, is a bubble and the fact that it's going to burst a feature or a bug of this capitalistic system? I question it. I don't know, because I do.
At this point, it has to feel like a feature, no?
I think it is, but you do want, you're trying to thread this sort of very complicated needle, right, where you're trying to create a system that has some semblance of speculation but not too much speculation. And how do you find the balance?
Which does bring us right to today, because I know you've talked about this before. You have said you believe that another bubble is coming.
Even how could it not be?
Exactly. How could it not be? Given our history, it's impossible to believe there won't be. But is there something different about this time, about AI, the businesses that are leading that effort? Or do you watch all of what's happening now and just think to yourself, we're in the same sort of boom and bust cycle as all?
No, I don't think it's completely the same. The truth is, look, there's leverage, meaning the loans, the debt, the credit in the system. That is the match that lights the fire of a financial crisis, always. So when you look at the euphoria around AI, the question is how much leverage is in the system? How much, what are consumers doing? Buy now, pay later. How many loans are being taken out to support the ecosystem that's being built of all of these data centers and the like? So there's part of me that likes to think that maybe we're like 1999 and not 1929 because it's like a tech-led bubble, and if it bursts, maybe for 2 or 3 years, equity values are down. One of the big changes that actually happened post-financial crisis 2008 that could come back to bite us is we regulated the banks quite heavily. And as a result, most loans in the U.S. and, by the way, parts of the rest of the world are now not really through banks at all anymore. They're through what's called the shadow banking system. Most people get a loan from what's called a private credit fund. And there is no disclosure required. We have no idea really how much leverage is in that system. We don't know how connected it is to other businesses, to the banking system, to anything else. And so, to me, the sort of black swan event is not just that you have a crack in the market, but you actually have a crack in this sort of private credit business, and that you learn all of a sudden that there's so much more leverage and people who took out enormous loans, businesses that took out loans and the like, that can't be paid back. And then you throw one other piece on the fire that we haven't even talked about, the amount of debt that the governments now have, which is to say back in 1929, there was a budget surplus. The U.S. had hardly any debt. Germany had a lot of debt, but the U.S. was not the problem. Today, the amount of debt that all of these countries has is enormous. And if you do believe that the answer to every financial crisis is throwing money at the problem, as politically unpalatable as that may sound, it may be more unpalatable to bond investors and to sort of the investor class that may say, we're not buying these treasuries anymore. We're not buying sovereign bonds, or we're doing it, but we're going to charge you extraordinary amounts, and then you get into this whole situation of austerity and these sort of vicious cycles.
That was Andrew Ross Sorkin speaking with Monocle's Chris Chermak. Next, we turn to Ukraine, where it's been a tough week for Volodymyr Zelensky's government as a corruption scandal has gripped the country. While the immediate damage to public trust and international reputation is undeniable, some are suggesting that there might be a silver lining, as Andrew Muller explains.
Among that peculiar strain of Western conservative which does not consider Ukraine worth supporting, a recurrent refrain is that Ukraine is corrupt. It is, of course, mildly hilarious that this line is generally taken by people who also consider themselves ardent supporters of US President Donald Trump, who, to pluck one example more or less at random from the bountiful cornucopia of available options, had his eponymous charitable foundation forcibly shut down in 2018 due to what the presiding judge called, quote, a shocking pattern of illegality, unquote, including the use of charitable funds to buy a painting of Trump to hang in one of his own golf clubs.
There could be no better birthday present.
Nevertheless, this extremely selectively outraged cohort are having a good week. There is a corruption scandal in Ukraine, and it is serious, in and of itself, and potentially for Ukraine's wider struggle for its own survival. Before we get into the details of the scandal and its possible ramifications, one caveat does need to be established, which is that war corrupts. This applies to any war, even a righteous and existential one such as that which Ukraine is presently waging.
The evacuation of British children is going on smoothly and efficiently.
In the United Kingdom, misty-eyed reveries for the selfless courage of the common citizen during the Blitz of World War II tend to neglect the chronic looting of damaged houses and shops, and in some instances corpses, the black market trade in ration coupons, the flourishing of prostitution and racketeering, the spurious claims for the £500 of compensation on offer to those who lost their homes. One EastEnder, the fabulously named Walter Handy, filed 19 such claims in a 5-month period before being rumbled and sentenced to 3 years in the clink. History does not record, sadly, whether he attempted to persuade the judge that he'd simply once done something to really upset the Luftwaffe. The point being that in time of war, a sense often descends that the usual rules have been suspended, as does a certain understandable fatalism. Especially when these commingle with access to the astonishing quantities of cash which funnel in and out of government coffers during war, people are going to be tempted. This is not, to be clear, to excuse such behaviour. For any public official to steal from your own country as it fights for survival is textbook treason. It is merely to note that anybody who has demanded that Ukraine get through the last 3.5 years of war and is insisting that Ukraine endures however much more to come without a single penny going astray is willfully imposing an impossible standard. None of which is to say that what has happened isn't bad, because it is.
Будь-які результативні дії проти корупції дуже потрібні.
Last week, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky asked for and received the resignations of his Energy Minister, Svitlana Grinchuk, and his Justice Minister and former Energy Minister, Herman Halyushenko. The pair are accused by Ukraine's national anti-corruption body, NABU, of involvement in a scheme under which Ukraine's state nuclear power company, Energoatom, was stinging suppliers for kickbacks to maintain their contracts. The amount thus purloined is estimated in the vicinity of 90 million euros, but nobody seems, as of this broadcast, too clear on where it all went. Among those that investigators believe might have some idea are Alexei Chernyshov, a close friend of President Zelensky and former Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, and Timur Mindich, another long-standing comrade and associate of President Zelensky, and a co-owner of Studio Kvartal 95, the television production company which Zelensky turned into a political machine. Timur Mindich appears to have skipped Ukraine in something of a hurry. Unconfirmed reports have him in Israel, of which he also holds citizenship. One picturesque detail released by investigators is a photograph of Mindich's matching gold toilet and bidet. Several others have been named and or arrested. Everybody denies everything, innocent until guilty, etc., but ordinary Ukrainians are angry, and understandably so. They are bracing for their fourth winter of war against an enemy making a recurrent point of striking energy infrastructure, with predictable consequences for light and heat, and Ukrainian winters are dark and cold. Though President Zelensky remains generally and correctly admired, he does appear to have a blind spot for this sort of stuff. Earlier this year, there were protests against him when he attempted to defang NABU. He backed down when the scale of public fury became unignorable. Zelensky is now vowing a clean-up of Ukraine's energy sector, including a new supervisory board at Energoatom and new management structures at other similar companies. He has acknowledged the obvious, which is that such work as has been done on corruption in Ukraine, though it is not nothing, has not been enough. All of which is approximately the last thing Zelensky and Ukraine needed. For any president, suggestions that their inner circle have their fingers in the till is a bad look. For a president who first pitched himself as the innocent, indignant, incorruptible sitcom character Vasyl Holoborodko, it is seriously wounding. For a president trying to maintain morale at a time of communal sacrifice and persuade such clubs as the EU and NATO that his country is a worthy member, it is grim in the extreme, and for a country reliant on a United States which often seems like it would be grateful for any excuse to abandon it, it is imaginably calamitous. But despite this cue for opponents to aid for Ukraine to revive their lurid fantasies of Zelensky using American taxpayers' money to buy yachts and so forth, there is a bright side. Ukraine is a country under siege and under martial law. There would have been every opportunity and every means for a properly unscrupulous regime to conduct corruption and cover it up. Instead, independent investigators are still able to pursue illegality to the highest levels of government, to a degree which a good few democracies at peace could learn from. It is a case which an advocate of President Zelensky's considerable skill should be able to make. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
Thanks, Andrew. Staying with Ukraine now, as our next highlight comes from this week's edition of Monocle on Fashion. Since the full-scale invasion in 2022, the leading lights of Ukraine's fashion industry have taken on a different role as voices of resistance and resilience against the backdrop of war. One such figure is Venya Bryakalin, the editor-in-chief of Vogue Ukraine. Since starting the job in June 2023, Bryakalin has organised an array of events and projects to shine a spotlight on Ukraine's creative community, most recently with an exhibition at London's Saatchi Gallery showcasing Ukrainian photographers. He joined Natalie Theodosi down the line from Paris, where, on account of the war, Vogue Ukraine's office is currently based. Natalie began by asking Bryakalin about his role as editor-in-chief during these fraught times.
I oversee both print edition and everything that goes online, but also as we are transforming into and venturing into new directions. That means overseeing everything that we're doing outside of our regular journalistic operation that comes with publishing books, to doing photography shows or any events that we are initiating to promote Ukrainian talent on the international scene. Yeah, so that's pretty much a 360 kind of operation these days, which I like to call it taking our expertise and sort of like the craft that we've trained to put into the two-dimensional space of a magazine layout and bringing it into the 3D of the real world, whatever that medium can be.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's true, what you're saying, it's that role is now much bigger than making the print magazine. And from what you're saying, a big part of it is also supporting and promoting Ukrainian talent, whether it's like the exhibitions that you do or the conferences. Do you find that that's a big part of your mission now?
I absolutely believe so. And I think what's so great working for a brand like Vogue and Vogue Ukraine is that you have the authority and you have the leverage and you have the expertise to do those things. And I think it's incredible that we have these opportunities to celebrate talent coming from Ukraine and tell all these important stories, because what we've kind of discovered intuitively throughout the big war in Ukraine is that we are pretty much one of the very few, if not the only international media brand operating from Ukraine that people outside of Ukraine, our global audience, kind of immediately recognize. So that gives us, first of all, great exposure, but also a lot of trust in what we do and a lot of interest into what we do. So I think to use that is very intuitive, and obviously it's a great responsibility, but also great honor.
That's such an interesting point, that it's a brand operating outside of Ukraine that's internationally recognized. And I wonder, has it, the last few years, given the war, has the role of the fashion magazine and a platform like Vogue changed in your eyes in what it has to do? And yes, there is fashion, but you also see it as a vehicle to tell stories about culture and society and diplomacy as well.
Well, I think historically what's been so great about the magazine is that we've never been purely fashion or lifestyle title. I think we've always, first of all, culture is such an important pillar of what we do and what we cover. But I think in general, the role of magazines has changed, and we've evolved as a brand, and Vogue Ukraine has become this, I think we've gained this new level of authority in the market, if I might say so, in terms of the outreach, but also in terms of the spectrum of the stories that we run and that we cover and people that we celebrate. And the audience, we've got such an incredible feedback on that, because I think people really, life is very non-linear and paradoxical sometimes, and especially with what's happening in our country, there's so much texture and so much gravity to what is happening and what people are going through. So I think our mission is kind of address all these experiences, but do it in a very hopeful way, to give people things to to feel inspired by, to look forward to celebrate, even despite everything that's going on. So yeah, I think our voice is going so much bigger because of that. And, and the spectrum of themes and subjects that we cover has grown a lot. And we're seeing very positive feedback from our audience in doing so.
Absolutely. And tell me about your process, because you're now based in Paris, you're running the magazine. What does it look like doing the job from Paris and working with your team in Ukraine?
Well, I think, first of all, like the bitter irony of what COVID has taught us is that we've learned to navigate this landscape and to operate in a way where you can work remotely. I've been traveling a lot before. And I think, again, we as an international brand, it's important for us to have the optics both outside and inside, looking outward and inward. And I have a fantastic team that I'm in touch pretty much like 24/7. And we've built this incredible trust with what everybody's doing and what we feel is important and what we feel is incredibly important to talk about. So there's a lot of conversations about what we're doing, why we're doing that, and how we're supposed to do that. So yeah, those are like my eyes and ears and my heart, talking to these people, to my team and working with them. But I also think it's important to have our eyes and also to understand what is happening globally and to be the part of a bigger conversation. And I always say, like if you want to be seated at the table, you have to take the seat at the table. And I think working internationally is what helps us keep this seat at the bigger table.
The editor-in-chief of Vogue Ukraine, Venya Briakelin, there speaking to Monocle's Natalie Teodosi. To the US now, where Fernando Augusto Pacheco had the pleasure of speaking with the editor-in-chief of Marie Claire US, Nikki Ogonaike. Since joining the beloved media brand 2 years ago, Nikki has brought her personal touch to both print and digital. Here she tells Fernando about the magazine's plans for 2026. Let's have a listen.
I joined late November 2023. And it was an interesting time to join Marie Claire. Like you said, the brand is iconic. It's a brand that's been around for over 30 years now. It's a brand that's always stood for women of power and purpose and style. But I like to say that when I joined, we had really good bones. We just needed a bit of renovation. If you look like at a brownstone or a home or something of the sort, we just needed a bit of a renovation on the inside. And so when I joined in 2023, that's what I set out to do.
Wow, that's fantastic. And, I grew up with the Brazilian edition of Marie Claire. So for me, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was always about a woman who works. There was perhaps a differential of the magazine. I don't know if you agree with me on that one.
Absolutely. When I started at Marie Claire, I was very clear that I wanted it to feel like a group chat of your most ambitious friends, right? So that means that you do care about work, but you also care about politics and you care about beauty and you care about style. But to your point, I think our woman is an unabashedly ambitious woman. She owns that and she cares about her career. She cares about success. She doesn't see ambition as a bad word and she really embraces it.
And tell us a bit more about Marie Claire's presence in the US. I know it has kind of a long history in the country as well. There's been changes, of course, as you said, in recent years. You were inside the magazine for, as you said, about a few years now. So tell us about the digital and print as well, because I know they're still in print. I mean, we need to talk about the wonderful cover by Tiana Taylor, which is fantastic. But tell us a bit more, how do you do the print and digital divide?
Definitely. So to your point, we print twice a year. We have a September issue and we have a March issue. Each are they fall in line with the fashion calendar, essentially. I come from a fashion background, so I think that I will always slightly be oriented around that. But I also have a really solid digital background and I understand how digital covers are important to the landscape. I see Marie Claire sort of as an ecosystem and digital covers factor into that ecosystem. So we do them 6 times a year. So it's a mix of print and digital. Each digital issue is focused on a theme. So Our upcoming January issue I can speak to is focused around moguls. And that's been the case in the past as well. In the last year that we had that, we've had issues centered around women in sports. We've had issues centered around next gen is another issue that's coming up in November. And so it's a mix of themes that we center the issues around for digital. We also at Marie Claire have a really great live event series called Power Play, which is an invite-only summit where we bring together about 115 women around the country. And we focus on networking and empowerment. And it speaks to all of the things that we care about here at Marie Claire. Community is really, really important to me. Community has always been important to me. And I think it was a thing that I wanted to bring back in a more nuanced way when I started at Marie Claire. So Power Play now travels around the country. We've done it in LA, we've done it in Atlanta and Philadelphia. And that's just been an opportunity, I think, to bring Marie Claire to the readers rather than like the readers having to come to us.
How important are those events for the brand and for the magazine in general?
I think they're really important. Events in general, I think, are incredible calling cards for brands. You know, Power Play is a spinoff of Power Trip that Anne Fullenwelder, former editor-in-chief of Marie Claire, invented. And it's just been a great opportunity for the reader to get to know us, for us to get to know the reader, to really make noise and sort of brand build and build community in real life.
Well, and talking about someone that is making noise at the moment is Teyana Taylor. And, you know, I've read your fabulous interview with her, and she is the woman of the moment, I would say. So tell us a bit more. She is indeed the cover girl for the latest Marie Claire imprint, right?
Yes, Teyana Taylor is our latest cover girl. That's our Changemakers issue. And Teyana is a changemaker in of herself. Obviously, she, started working when she was 16. And she has not stopped. And I think that she's really coming into a very incredible season for her. Obviously, she's in One Battle After Another, Paul Thomas Anderson's film, but she's also in
Love the
television. It's absolutely incredible film. And I'm really happy that Teyana has been able to show off all sides of her. And I think that in that film, she does it really well. She's also in a TV show with Ryan Murphy called All's Fair. And so she's just having such a great time right now in her career. And I hesitate to say it's a moment because I don't think that you can define Teyana in just a moment. Like, she is here for the long game. And I think that's what makes her a change maker and why I was really excited to have her on the cover. I had the pleasure of doing the interview. It's also an episode of my podcast, Nice Talk. And so I think that also shows what we're able to do at Marie Claire, which is use these opportunities when we speak to change makers like Teyana and really put it on all of the platforms that we have. So not just print, not just digital, but also in audio form.
I was curious as well about Marie Claire. What's your relationship with the other international titles? I mean, is there kind of a collaboration between all of those versions?
Yeah, there's definitely a collaboration. We work with Marie Claire International, and they sort of connect us to all of the various Marie Claires around the world, really. So, Marie Claire France or Marie Claire China, like, we all are able to work together and really learn from each other, which is, I think, a really special way of continuing on that ecosystem that I spoke of before.
Nikki Ogunaike there, the editor-in-chief of Marie Claire US, in conversation with Monocle's Fernando Augusto Pacheco on last weekend's edition of The Stack. Still to come, here on The Curator, we stop off in Dubai for the city's Design Week, meet the new boss at the helm of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and head to Paris to sample a traditional Swiss Christmas market. Stay tuned.
Craft matters, in small ways, like how a coffee is brewed, and in not-so-small ways, like how your money is cared for, which is why for 160 years, UBS has elevated banking to a craft, tailoring unique strategies that combine human expertise with the latest technologies, all happening across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the heart of it all. UBS, banking is our craft.
You're with The Curator, our weekly highlights show here on Monocle Radio. I'm Carlotta Rebello. We head to Dubai now for the city's Design Week. Inaugurated 10 years ago, this annual celebration continues to promote design in the UAE's most populous city. Among its exhibitions and workshops, the event also holds an annual competition called Urban Commissions. Monocle's man in Dubai, Inzaman Rashid, went along to meet one of the founders of Some Kind of Practice and explore their winning commission.
At the very heart of Dubai Design District, amid glass towers and polished storefronts, a humble courtyard has quietly stolen the show. It's called When Does a Threshold Become a Courtyard? The winning entry for Urban Commissions 2025 by UAE-based studio Some Kind of Practice. Founded by architects Abdullah Abbas and Amal Darwish, the studio's installation sits like a pause in the city, open, porous, and instinctively familiar. Built from concrete blocks, plywood, and arish, woven palm fronds, it feels more like a majlis than a monument.
We wanted to look at what makes a courtyard. We look at it historically, programmatically, functionally, but also materially. So when you look at the materials in the courtyard, that was a huge part of it as well. So when you look at it from outside, you're questioning like what's happening. Like it has a specific form. You see a lot of arish. You also have a bit of the concrete blocks peeking at the bottom. But when you enter into the space, the courtyard is protected. So you walk into this transitional circulation space where you get this connection to the sky as well, and then you walk into the courtyard. So historically and traditionally, the courtyard is always protected.
The courtyard unfolds gradually. You step through a shaded passage, the Lewan, a traditional Emirati threshold, before arriving at an open-to-sky clearing. The light dances across the Arish screens. The air feels lighter, cooler.
When you walk into a building, you never walk directly into the building. You usually enter what we call a Liwan. So the Liwan is this transitional space that brings you from the outside into the courtyard. But the function of a courtyard was always multifunctional. Depending on the season, usually, the courtyard is either used or not used. So it's a very flexible space. During the winter periods, families would usually come outside and sit together, and sometimes would even like bring out their beds and sleep outside. So what we also did with our space is we left it empty. It's a multifunctional space. Throughout the week, we're going to have multiple programming that happens, which will transform the space. So for example, we will have a lecture that happens. We're also going to have like a dining experience where we're going to be arranging like a central table that will be underneath this aperture. So that is also in how the courtyard used to be used functionally.
Abdullah and Amal's design stems from months of fieldwork, travelling across the Emirates, from mountain villages in Fujairah to abandoned homes in Al Quwain. They studied how the old Hoosh courtyards were shaped by climate, craft and community.
One of the major things that we wanted to look at is proof of materiality. Because we always hear about materials like arish or even like stone or corrugated sheet. We kind of see it, but we wanted that proof. So through our field work, we went to like this abandoned neighborhood in Al Quwain. So when we went over there, a lot of it has been demolished now, or like through time it's withered. But that's where we see the Liwan. Why did we want to do this? Because we didn't want to go to one of the recreated villas. We wanted to go and find villas that have been preserved from back then and untouched. Even though they haven't withstood the toll of time, the Liwan is very much present. The Hoosh, the courtyard, is very much protected. Part of our research is we wanted to connect the three biomes of the UAE. The three biomes being the coastal regions, the desert regions, and the mountainous region. Materially, for example, in the mountainous regions, they used to stack rocks to form their boundary. But what we did is we also wanted to combine it with current architectural practices. So we wanted to make it a point where you do get some of this newer material. So we replaced the stone with concrete blocks, but we maintained the wood. So this wood is all been sourced here from the UAE. Everything completely off the shelf. The Arish panels were brought from Jebel Ali, but they're originally from Ajman. The Arish was sourced from Ajman. So we got like the local craftsmen also to come and install their Arish panels. So the entire thing, nothing has been imported.
It's a design that builds with what's present, not imposed, a principle the studio hopes to see revived in contemporary Emirati architecture.
Unfortunately, the connecting factors are minimal because nowadays we've completely changed the way we build our houses. So for example, in the past, the boundary of the building was the start of the house. There was no boundary wall and then the house begins. So you enter directly into the house most of the time. Nowadays, we have 4 walls surrounding our villas, and then you have a villa at the center of it, which could be interpreted as a courtyard. Those boundaries are still maintaining that privacy. They're still doing the function of what it was, but architecturally, the way we construct our houses has completely changed. Luckily, there are a lot of houses that you will find to this day where they have a boundary wall, but they still have a courtyard at the center of their house. So what Umar and I are kind of looking at is to kind of bring back that thinking, to bring back that type of architecture, because I feel like it was something that we left too early.
When I walked inside, it felt instinctively familiar, like a majlis awaiting coffee and conversation.
All you have to do is put up some seating, and it becomes a majlis.
Becomes a majlis. It's literally the first thing I thought when I walked in.
Exactly.
Was like, it is designed obviously for kind of multi-purpose.
Yeah.
But straight away the feeling I got was like, sit
100%.
down, it's a majlis.
Yeah,
you can really fit it out like that.
Especially in the outdoors, when the weather's a lot nicer, the arish is an extremely porous material. It's not blocking wind from coming in. You don't feel stuffy on the inside. It's not even dusty. That wind coming in and out is a huge part of it. And this aperture is also adding to that as well.
Beyond beauty, some kind of practice champions material honesty and reuse, what Abdullah calls design for disassembly.
One thing I think that's really, really huge, it's happening a lot in the world, but this idea of design for disassembly. So especially for temporary structures like this in D3, we made sure that most of the materials that you see over here can be returned and reused for other purposes. So for example, the wood is going to be returned. All of the arish is going to be returned to other sites because the company that we worked with specialized in arish and arish construction. So from here, it's going to go to maybe the National Day celebration that's going to be happening next month. That idea, I think, is really, really important, especially for temporary structures, especially, again, in the outdoors. So in the UAE, we're very seasonal. In the winter, a lot of these things pop up. So why not build something like this that is really lightweight, very cheap, not that difficult to assemble, doesn't need to be overly clean and perfected, but can be put up as easily as it is let down.
It's a sustainability rooted in tradition, the same resourcefulness that once defined Gulf architecture. When does a threshold become a courtyard isn't just an installation, it's an argument for slowness, for shade, for sitting still even. A reminder that in design, as in life, meaning often lives in the spaces between.
Inzaman Rashid there with that report for this week's edition of The Urbanist. Next, a highlight from Tuesday's edition of The Globalist. The luxury hotel director Mr. and Mrs. Smith was founded in 2003 by James and Tamara Lohan and has evolved into a global travel club with more than 1 million members. Since being acquired by Hyatt in 2023, the platform has been opened up to the group's 51 million World of Hyatt loyalty scheme members. This summer, the founders handed the reins to longtime colleague and now CEO Natasha Shafi, who joined Monocle's Tom Webb at Midori House to talk about her 6 months in the position and the year ahead.
I would say it's been a year of many chapters. There is a beautiful brutality to business, which I guess I really enjoy. Personally, it's been a huge one for me. So I stepped into the role of CEO here at Mr. and Mrs. Smith in April. I've been in the business for 20 years, and it was a real milestone and privilege to, I guess, take the keys from the founders and be the first employee leading Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So a real moment for me personally. With having a great supporting parent company in Hyatt, it feels like an opportunity for us to embrace new scale in a way that's exciting. But it's certainly been a very choppy year, I guess, for luxury travel in particular, where with all that's happening in the macro kind of environment, it certainly doesn't mean that luxury travel isn't affected, of course, by that. But there is a resilience to it that we've been very lucky to kind of navigate as well. And having that self-awareness and, I guess, courage to face what we face when it comes from a trading perspective, but more importantly, having the kind of tactical levers and entrepreneurial spirit that's still very important to Smith to make sure that we navigate those waters through 2025. So it's not over yet. As I keep telling the team, we've still got 6 weeks until Christmas. Is that right? So we'll be, making sure we make each and every day count. But it's definitely been a year where I feel I've had probably 20 years smashed into one.
So a lot of change. Speaking of change, there is a parent company called the World of Hyatt. How has that moved the business around, or is it in fact business as usual?
So, being, I guess, one of the original founding kind of team members, one thing to say is that good entrepreneurs and business owners understand when they have reached the potential of the business under their leadership and their stewardship, but more importantly, have the broad shoulders and, I guess, maturity to understand having a strategic acquisition in our case is actually only going to benefit the business, the inception, the idea that they've created, and make sure that it kind of lives for another 20, 30, 50 years into the future under kind of experience on a different level. And so from our perspective, we are very lucky in terms of our parent company. They've acquired Mr. and Mrs. Smith, a different brand, a very boutique and luxury, business that they've not had bought before, and they've let us be who we are. And that's really important and very wise of them, because they don't want to make sure we lose our magic and the things that we do really well. But they certainly have that kind of lovely arm around our shoulder to say, okay, but here's a big world now that we can embrace together without ever kind of compromising our curation and our brand standards. So for that, I always use the word evolution, and I mean that very intentionally. It is an evolution for the business. It's not forgetting where we came from, and it's not changing for the sake of changing, but it's embracing this new opportunity and this level of scale. So far, really beautiful relationship and a great opportunity for the next stage of our potential.
And is that the feeling from the consumer experience as well? Are customers saying, it hasn't changed. In fact, it's enhanced my relationship with the brand?
I don't think many people really know we're acquired. And I think I would say that's a measure of success in some ways, because it is testament to our parent company doing exactly what they're demonstrating for us internally, which is letting us live and breathe the brand and the business as it began and as it is understood today. So from a consumer perspective, I think very few would actually even know that, we're acquired, we've been acquired. We have, though, new customers, meaning World of Hyatt members can now, book Mr. and Mrs. Smith hotels. Again, we don't necessarily deal with those World of Hyatt members. They're looked after by the kind of Hyatt team, if that makes sense. But our hotels are now getting a variety of customers staying at their hotels. And so that's the, I guess, navigation, the opportunity for the hotels as well. That we're opening up new markets, but that's, I guess, the place where our customer would actually feel the difference.
Now, we're in a very privileged position talking to you because you do have that 20 years of vision and wealth of experience with the brand. If we're going to go back 20 years, are there still properties, are there still hotels that share the ethos of the brand that you're still with? And what are those values?
Yeah, so one thing that I'm very, again, intentionally doing is making sure that we're visiting. I can visit. My dream would be able to go to all the hotels around the world and say hello. And I hope that dream will come true one day. But I have been very intentional with my time, especially with the transition, of making sure that hoteliers know who I am, not for the sake of me, Natasha, but just for the reassurance of what I represent as CEO now and what is not going to change, as I said, and what will be protected, but also the opportunity that they have. So I went to go and visit Limewood, one of the original Mr. and Mrs. Smith hotels that joined, 15 years ago, I think it was actually. And they are solely independent with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And what I mean by that is we're the only other person apart from themselves that looks after their distribution of their rooms and, making sure that guests stay with them. And so going there and visiting the property, which is remarkable and beautiful and very special, and speaking to the MD, I believe it was, and the general manager, and understanding what is really important to them and how by meeting me in understanding our next journey that we're going to protect that specialness. They don't necessarily want to take on all of the wonderful things that Smith can offer them. And that's okay. It's that human connection. So yes, there are lots of properties that, have been in our collection for a long time and will remain to be, because that partnership is the most important thing. And understanding that as each of our hotels are very different in terms of our curation, there isn't a cookie cutter setting and criteria. It's about making sure we go and visit each of them and experience that hotel and represent that hotel in its true, trueness and, identity. It's also knowing that each hotel has its own needs. And that relationship that we've built over 20 years with them, and more importantly, will continue to nurture in this next stage, will still remain. And they don't have to conform to X, Y, and Z. It's about making sure we fulfill the needs that they really desire us to fulfill, and do so in a way that Smith has always done that, which is very human and very personal to them.
That was the Mr. and Mrs. Smith CEO Natasha Shafi in conversation with Monocle's Tom Webb. You're with The Curator, our weekly highlights show here on Monocle Radio. Now, how do you recreate the magic of Zurich's Christmas markets in new cities? This week, after several editions across Switzerland, the Swiss Christmas market comes to Paris for the first time. It's called Noël La Villette, held in the park in the northeast of the city, and will feature more than 100 chalets, raclette, and plenty of Glühwein. Monocle's Tom Edwards caught up with Katja Wieber, the co-founder and creative force behind Zurich's beloved markets. She began by telling Tom how each city lends its own sparkle.
When we started the Christmas market at Bellevue in Zurich, I said, you cannot do this somewhere else. I was so proud. I said, this is so specific for Zurich. We were asked by other cities or people from other cities, entrepreneurs, to kind of co-host or partner or co-develop new concepts for their city after they saw ours. And I said, it's not possible. This is really for Zurich. And then we started thinking and talking about what we did. We always try to think out of the perspective of the citizens, obviously. We need to understand from our partners what is the sparkle of Christmas or festive season for them. Even different when you only go 1 hour away to Lucerne, where we did the market, or in Geneva, where we are just close to the lake with this amazing international view that you get there. And the market is much bigger because you have a huge space which you need to fill. We had a Ferris wheel integrated. Or now in Paris, we have a huge fountain in the middle where you can put the market around and the stalls, but also those areas where people can collect, where we have fire pits and a bit of a cozy spot. So it just gets everywhere where we are a little bit of a different thing. You feel it. We have different colors of the stalls. It has still the essence of the other.
But I think that's really interesting that you say it's definitely recognizably the same, but it's very, very different, because that's quite an interesting creative tension, isn't it? To make sure that places are unique and yet part of the family. Just mention a couple of specific things. So, I don't know, go to a particular one of your locations, maybe a single moment. You've mentioned some already, but what are a couple of the things that give you the extra wowishness if people are planning on a visit? I don't know, maybe in Paris, this new site, or one of the older sites, Bellevue all these years in. Take me to a particular spot and just describe what it's like, what people will experience, why you're still so passionate about it, why it will deliver all that Christmas magic that people want.
I'm so much of a Christmas and Christmas market lover that I would say, please go and visit all of them. Every market, every location has this uniqueness and the different smell in a way, or flavor. My recommendation for this year is, of course, go to Paris and visit it. It's only a 4.5 hours ride with the train from here, so you could even do both at the same weekend. But one of my favorites, but it's also because I love the two girls so much with whom we work there, is Geneva, because the city of Geneva has this, it's so different from the other cities that we could co-create already. And this spot that we have there just on the lake, where you are sitting in the fond du chalet and you have those huge windows and you can see the lake just 1 meter beside you. And then you stroll through the market. They have beautiful vendors. It's just, I would really definitely send you there if you would say which one unique spot you want to visit. We have Illuminarium and Landesmuseum, which is a light show, which is completely different from everything else and a little bit longer. But this is something that we did once, and it's completely different from any other Christmas experience.
That was Katja Wieber in conversation with Tom Edwards. Well, that's all we've got time for on this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by Sam MP and presented by me, Carlotta Rebello. Join us again next week to hear some of the very best of the programs here on Monocle Radio. Goodbye and thanks for listening.